All right, so this is a new series within Lazy Summer that we're calling Better Than Benchmarks, which is, really a series that's really just wanting to explore the benchmark yields within DeFi for ETH and stablecoins, namely probably USDC, but also USDT. And wants to also explore sort of the top yields in DeFi, we think that it's very useful to explore this and to understand the set of opportunities out there, and how really just sort of explore how Lazy Summer gives you exposure to a lot of these top opportunities automatically. But also it might identify things that, or yield sources that should go into the Lazy Summer protocol. So first, I think really wanting to understand what is it that you as a user should be expecting as, benchmark yield within DeFi for ETH and for, on stablecoins basically. So for ETH, you should be expecting around 2.26 percent. Which is right around the staking yield, and yeah, that's basically what you should be kind of expecting in DeFi, which has stayed relatively stable throughout the year, and I think it's something we can likely expect to stay relatively stable into the future. Now, that is not the case for stablecoins. The stablecoin yield over the last year has been fairly volatile and very, very, very diversified. So, a lot of different places have given you different risk exposure to DeFi yield over the course of the last year, and that has manifested in, quite a let's say fluctuating or high to low. Sort of benchmark USD or stablecoin rate. Now, a lot of these best performing vaults for both USD and ETH have changed over the course of periods, and they often switch different spots, and a lot of the usual suspects, so to speak, have been in these top spots, but they tend to fluctuate. So now, if we go to explore, and we want to remember what these sort of benchmark yields are, because we're going to come back to this. So 2.2 around for ETH and around 3.7 for USDC. Now, recently, the yields within DeFi have dropped off quite a bit, given the sort of market context. So we'll focus on ETH. Make sure the yield is 30 days, 30-day average, and I think a minimum TVL of 10 million per vault or underlying yield sources is reasonable, basically. And then we want to sort by APY. And what you can see here is a lot of the, a lot of these underlying yield sources, or a lot of these yields, are familiar names. So, but I think one thing that really sets these different yield sources apart is their underlying mechanism. So a lot of these lending ones, these are different risk curators that have their own sort of risk profiles and are, depositing into underlying strategies, or underlying, collateral types rather. Now, when it comes to these yield aggregators, I think it is a little bit like these yield aggregators are certainly not created equal. For example, EtherFi Liquid was just proposed to be into Lazy Summer, and was rejected, given the a lot of the assumptions around the underlying yield sources within this yield aggregator itself. So it's always tricky to do a fundamental or analysis of these or compare these yield sources and these yields one to one, because as you see, Lazy Summer is fairly high up in this ranking, but it's certainly, of course, I'm biased, but I have very clear reasons in my mind why it is certainly set apart from many of these competitors, let's say, but also just like other yield sources. Mainly because, for example, Instadap Lite is quite volatile. It's an amplification of the staking rate, the ETH staking rate, which can be very volatile. If you deposit in, there's a withdrawal queue and withdrawal delays, for example, which are all things that are not necessarily highlighted here, basically. Now, nevertheless, all of these yield sources are significantly beating the sort of benchmark rate of 2.2 for ETH. Now, we mentioned that let me just go back here to get this how we had it before. Just ETH and sort by APY, and I want to do 10 million ETH. There we go. Okay. Now, so all of these are beating that benchmark by in some cases more than double, which is great. And as I said, all of these yield sources are not necessarily created equal, and I really want to highlight Lazy Summer here and how it sort of separates from these other underlying yield sources. So if we go into Lazy Summer, ETH higher risk, as of right now, this is giving access to Compound, Fluid Light mainly. So you might ask yourself, okay, well, why wouldn't I just go into Fluid Light, which is higher on the ranking here with respect to APY as of right now? And well, the reason why it makes sense not to do that is because as the Fluid Light yield fluctuates, which it certainly will, the Lazy Summer protocol will be able to rebalance automatically into new yield sources, and especially as the market structure changes and as the caps for all of these yield sources change and are dynamic, this vault will be able to allocate to them automatically as the caps change and as the sort of market structure changes. So I think the key thing to really highlight here is that Lazy Summer specifically, given its structure, given its creation and how it was designed, is really giving exposure to pretty much everything that on this front page of VaultSite FYI that has a good risk profile, because everything within the Lazy Summer profile has gone through a risk process, has been given a specific cap that it can be allocated to, not just once, but continually updated over time, such that, VaultSite FI is really great for giving us just a basic snapshot of where the yields are today. But Lazy Summer is almost, in a way, a more dynamic VaultSite FII because you're always getting the best yield sources, but it's, changing and evolving and adapting based on the risks and the balance of risk within the market. Now, let's briefly touch on USDC, or we can even do let's focus on USDC for today, and next time we can do USDT. Now, USDC, I think also 10 million as a benchmark is good, and we sort by sort by APY, which we've done, and that's great. And we can see here that there are a bunch of different yield sources within within you know within the market that are interesting here. So this is all stablecoins though. So we want to do it actually just for USDC, which we can do here. Where can we find USDC? There we go. And that can give us a nice snapshot of, where to find the best sort of yields in DeFi today for USDC. Now, this is across all networks, which I think is fine. I mean, that's not necessarily apples to apples, but that's no problem. And we can start to see a lot of these different, yield sources, and we can start to evaluate them. Now, what you'll see here, differently than ETH, is that Lazy Summer is not on the front page here, and in some cases, I think that might cause question. Hey, why isn't Lazy Summer on the front page? But I think the other question is one of risk. So, as you can see, within Lazy Summer for USDC lower risk, let's say, you'll notice that a bunch of the yield sources that you see in the top of Vaults.FYI, FYI, for example, there's this Gauntlet USDC Frontier, for example, or RE7 USDC. Well, that's on World Chain. There's let's try and find another one, Hyperrhythm USDC, Smokehouse USDC. These are all, within more or less within this vault already, and the caps have been set to 0, which is to say Lazy Summer is taking a risk assumption, or the Block Analytica, the risk curator within Lazy Summer, is taking a risk assumption to say, hey, they actually don't think that these underlying yield sources, the yield that they are bearing is worth the risk that they give off, which is obviously something that is not surfaced here on Vaults.FYI. So a lot of these that are already in, that are at the top of the leaderboard here, are already in Lazy Summer, but, the balance of risk doesn't warrant them to be actually allocated to today. And that is the opinion of, the risk curator, Block Analytica within Lazy Summer. Now, a lot of these, for example, Apollo, it's hard to actually distinguish because MEV was rejected to go into Lazy Summer, but Apollo from Midas was accepted to go into Lazy Summer. So again, just the balance of risk. If we think about the different yield sources here that are presented, it's really hard to just look at them just in terms of their yield. You have to think about the risks, and this is where we get Lazy Summer. Maybe, I'm not sure, halfway down the second page here, and you have to think to yourself, well, what is the risk reward of these different yields here relative, to the benchmark of around 3.7% for USD in DeFi. But yeah, so I mean that's generally what I would say. I think the overall takeaway from this week's beating benchmarks is that, one, all Lazy Summer vaults are technically beating the benchmark of ETH at 2.2% and USDC at around 3.7%, or stablecoins at 3.7%. So it's a great place to be, regardless, because as the balance of risk change within the DeFi ecosystem, a lot of the yield sources that are supported here in the top of, for example, Vaults.FYI, are naturally supported within the Lazy Summer protocol. But as the balance of risk change, that's when they will start to be allocated to. So it's hard to just look at yield in and of itself, and what the yields are relative to benchmarks, but you have to ask yourself, why is this yield so high relative to the benchmarks? What are the risks and the assumptions of risk that are taking place as a result? And regardless of if you decide to deposit into Lazy Summer Protocol or not, I think it is worthwhile to look at these different yield sources, look at the allocation caps within, Lazy Summer, for example, and if you start to see some that are overlapped, but they don't have any risk caps set, or they have a risk cap of 0, it might be worthwhile to ask yourself, why are these risk caps set to 0? And what is the risk that is being underwritten by the people who are actually deciding to lend here? And is that something that you're comfortable with, or does it make sense to just deposit in Lazy Summer and have all that hard risk work and all the hard rebalancing work done for you? So that's the first, better than benchmarks. It'll change and evolve as things go on and move on. But yeah, we'd love comments and stuff like that to see how we can make it a better and more useful show. So yeah.